All right, well, let's get into the special features. So, kicking it off with my review of Metroid Dread. So, I should say that, like, putting all the cards on the table, I'm a huge Metroid fan. Super Metroid is my favorite game of all time. Still has not been surpassed to this day. Some games have come close. Dark Souls, Rocket League. Very different games, obviously. But Metroid's massive for me. I've never really played much of... Well, that's a lie. I've played a lot of Metroid Prime. But I've never, I wasn't really into games at the time. Didn't, have a GameCube. So I've never really, got onto that. I will go back and play those games. I'm really keen to, obviously. But 2D Metroid is very much my wheelhouse. And this being the sort of conclusion of the 2D Metroid story arc around the Metroids, simply this game is amazing. I loved it. Like, it actually exceeds all of my, even if I had higher expectations for this game, it exceeded it.
Wow.
No spoilers in this review, and it won't be a super long one. I have beaten the game. It's not super long. It's standard sort of Metroid. I think it took me about 8 hours to get through it, and I sort of collect a bit of things, just some sort of themes around the game. I think people will find this game hard. I died a lot in this game. And again, no spoilers if you've seen any of the trailers, and they've tried to spoil as much as they can. And I'll spoil this game less than Nintendo will.
Everyone in the internet is trying to spoil this game. I'm regretting not buying it at launch.
I'm getting off the internet.
Yeah, no, it would actually really made me upset if some of the things that happened in this game got spoiled. So, there's so much cool fanfare in this game. As a big Metroid fan, obviously I've played all of the 2D Metroid games multiple times over. There's so many things, really deep cuts that you can see what they've done, that I think most casual people, whatever, or even people who know the games. And it just shows so much love from MercurySteam into this game. It's just I couldn't imagine the amount of pressure that you would feel coming to a series that's so kind of beloved and honestly is a bit of a cult kind of hit rather than a critical hit. This is surely going to be the best-selling Metroid game ever until Metroid Prime 4 comes out, and I'm sure that will dethrone it. But yeah, for the guys to come through and the girls, man, they've done such a good job. It's so impressive. I tried to keep my expectations low for it. Nintendo were hyping the hell out of this game. And yeah, man, it just really lived up to everything. And there's elements of this game. So just going back to the themes, the difficulty in the game, I loved. I wanted it to be a harder game. I don't think it's the hardest Metroid game, but I'll kind of describe that in the way that I'd probably still say Metroid is the hardest NES version.
Do you think it's the hardest after Super Metroid? Super Metroid onwards?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Yeah, for sure. Zero Mission, I don't even think Zero Mission is as hard as maybe even Super Metroid, because there's so many quality of life factors that they put into the games to make them easier. And Super Metroid, as much as I love that game, obviously, the controls are very they're not modern really. They still feel good, but they're very specific to Super Metroid. I know that you played it recently, Mike. I don't know if you felt that, where it was a bit you'd probably almost say it's clunky. Maybe.
Yes and no. I think this is a really weird experience because it runs at 60, or at least it feels like it runs at 60. It's a really smooth Metroid experience. So it's hard to compare.
Wait, are you talking about Super Metroid, or are you talking about?
No, I'm talking about Dread. Yeah.
Oh, okay. No, I was talking about Super Metroid. 60. I was talking about Super Metroid.
Oh,
if you felt that was clunky when
that's
you played
clunky.
It.
Sorry, I definitely by modern standards, that absolutely felt like a clunky game. But interestingly enough, it's still, because it's such a good game. It you don't think about that anymore, and you just play it, and you get over it, and you put yourself in the shoes of a child almost.
Yeah.
But this Dread is super smooth. It still feels like Metroid in many, many ways, but there's so many improvements, and it runs so well from what I've played so far.
So, as I said, I played the whole thing. There's a few choppy bits, but it's a very solid game. It's not rock solid 60, but it's pretty much rock solid 60 for most of the game. There's a few segments, I won't again spoil it, where there's a lot of particle effects, stuff like that happening on the screen, and if you've got an eye for it, you definitely can tell that it starts to get a bit choppy. I had played this on the Switch OLED, I should say that to people. It's funny, I don't almost think that they knew, or maybe they weren't aware of the Switch OLED, because one thing about OLED screens is when you feed the screen just zeros, right? And what I mean by that is there's no color, it turns the display off. But then even the faintest non-zero color looks very like harsh. Do you sort of follow what I mean?
Yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just feel that like they mustn't have known about the Switch OLED, because there's a few scenes when you're playing it where it's like it looks a bit like weird because of the patterns that kind of occur, because it's going zeros to like a little bit of black, like it's still almost imperceptibly black on a normal display, but with OLED it pops in a bad way, really. But yeah, like I love the difficulty. Just going back to it, it's like I wanted a game like this. This is like, honestly, outside of not being 2D, which, like, to be honest, I just couldn't really ever see them going back to a 2D art style. I'd love if they did that. That is like just not what people want, really. It makes it really hard when you want to do cinematics and all that kind of stuff. But outside of that, like if I took that factor out, it's almost like the game that I would like them to make, because it's trying to give you different things. So kind of going on another topic, you know, with the Emmy, you know, the robots that you see and they try to hunt you down, it really genuinely adds a different dimension and element to the game. Again, won't spoil any of it outside of what you've already seen with the trailers, but, you know, the title is awesome, and I'm so glad they went with it, because it does give you that feeling of dread when you're having to go through those segments. So just the way it works, they've clarified this in the trailers before, but it's not like the whole game is full of areas where you're running into the Emmy robots. Like there are bits where you'll know you're going to kind of confront them, and you can kind of avoid them, or, you know, do whatever you need to do, what the game's trying to get you to do. It does, like, I don't know. I think because I'm a very, like, you know, I just want to fight and get into it and melee, and, like, I don't like stealth generally in games unless it's so perfectly executed. It felt a bit clunky for me at times. It felt like a little bit unbalanced almost. Like sometimes you genuinely would get caught and there's nothing you could do. Like there was like genuinely nothing you could do, and it felt a bit unfair. But the quality of life for the game is so high that, you know, the game is super snappy, loads back in, you die, you're just straight in. Like the saves are almost irrelevant in this game. And that's where, like, going back to the comparison about difficulty, Metroid NES is the hardest because you don't have any quality of life. And it's just very frustrating, that game at times, right? If you're playing it like the way I played it, you know, when I was a kid, versus this in itself is much harder, but you die, you sort of just respawn again, like straight at the last little segment. There's only one time in the whole game where I respawned like multiple screens earlier, and I was like, oh, okay, like that actually shocked me. I was like, shit, I have to get through this whole bit again. And, you know, you can get through it pretty quickly. The story's great. Obviously, won't spoil any of that.
Sorry, there was a question I was waiting to ask.
Yeah, sorry, mate, yeah.
How, and it relates to that, that's why I cut him. The presentation of the story we know has kind of, or some of the worst aspects of certain Metroid games is how they handle the story, or how they handle having too much story and stuff. Samus Returns was pretty good. MercurySteam's last try at it. Is it along those lines, or do they try to force more stuff in, more narrative? Like, how's the balance with that?
Look, for me, perfect, because you know, like, and I've been criticized in the comments and everything like that. Come at me, that's fine. I find it funny. I'm just like not a story person for games. Like if I want to see a really good story, I'll go like top tier TV shows, movies, books. Like with games, I've never ever gone, oh, I want to get into this story in a game, right? It's just never clicked with me. So I'm like, I don't skip over stuff really, but I sometimes tune out. Like when I'm following the story of the game, I'm like, whatever, I just want to kill things, right? But this game, it like, because it blends it in really well with the cinematics, and then like it does a really cool thing where, you know, cinematic, and then it goes straight into the character because it's rendering it like in the game engine. It just makes it seamless. You can skip it if you really want to, like, so you really can get it out of your way. And it doesn't do too much. I felt it was a little bit clunky at the start. It was a bit like, it got me nervous, I must admit. It was the only time playing the game where I got nervous the first like almost 5 minutes of the game. I'm like, really? Is this how they're presenting? I was kind of thinking, are they presenting like this because it's an homage to things like Super Metroid, where it's like scrolling text at the start of the game, like kind of giving you the update? And I'm like, are they like that deep into the lore and to the style of it? And like having played the whole game, they probably are paying a bit of an homage to the series in how they opened it.
It felt like it, yeah.
Without having played it yet, like that sounds exactly what they were trying to do.
Yeah, it just made me nervous though, because I was like, oh god, like, because you don't know how much Nintendo influenced MercurySteam, vice versa. You just never know that kind of stuff. You probably never know.
What you don't want is Metroid Fusion,
Yeah.
and I love Fusion, but where they stop you and they feed you this stuff, and then they like just say go here, and there's like, it's almost like at that point it's a linear title. You don't want obviously Other M, which is the most extreme version of that situation, and even something like Metroid Prime 3, where it's just a lot more cutscenes, where the whole thing we talked about before, Metroid is like feeling isolated and feeling like the environment is a character as much as any NPCs you might have in any other game. So it's good to hear that it's more like Samus Returns in that regard, that I think it found a good balance.
Yeah, and I'll say the whole way it worked with, because MercurySteam made a remake of Metroid 2, which was a Game Boy game, released on the 3DS. Samus Returns, as Swinny just mentioned. It really does feel like, everything they learned with Samus Returns, they've just amplified it in every single way. Like the combat, the feel of the game feel is way better than Samus Returns. Like way better. It feels really good. Like, controversial, but I almost feel like this might be just the best feeling 2D Metroid game, which like I am so happy with. And it's like 60 frames per second, like Mike said. Just like on the whole linearity of the game. Because, that's kind of almost like the core element of a Metroid game where you go, where do I go? Like even, Swinny, you're like, and Mike as well. I know that you both got like stuck in certain parts in Super Metroid, but I kind of love that about those games. I'll take this, and I think the audience and people listening should take this with a grain of salt, because I've played a lot of these types of games and also a lot of Metroid. So it's kind of like, I'm already kind of anticipating what's next and what you should do and all these kind of things in the back of my mind. I felt it was kind of almost like, not on rails, but I don't think I even got stuck one single time in the game. Like it was just like, bang, next area, next area, next area. But, I only checked reviews last night. I hadn't seen anything about this game, anyone's thoughts on it. And I was really surprised to see people keep saying, oh, I got lost, I didn't know where to go, da da da. So, I think it's so hard to tune that in these kind of games, because you don't want to do something that Fusion did, which was like, literally put waypoints on the map. It's like, go here, go here. Like that's just horrible to do that kind of stuff. And it's a big criticism I have of Zero Mission. Like that game also really like hold your hand a bit too much, in my opinion. But still better than the original Metroid. Overall thoughts, I really, really love this game. I hope this is not the end of Metroid. Like I hope this isn't the, Metroid 2D's finished. I don't know. Like I know that they've sort of said this concludes the Metroid element, which is funny for a series. That's what the name of it is. And that kind of story arc, which it definitely does once you play it. But yeah, no, loved it. Absolutely loved it. Probably give it like a 9 out of 10 on the old school scale.
Cool.
I will do a tier list of the 2D Metroid games and treat the remakes as separate, because I do think that they're separate in terms of how they play. And I think this will fare well, actually. Is there any questions or anything you wanted to add, Mike? Because I know you've started playing it.
No, I mean, I have a lot of questions about the game, but I don't want to know the answers to at the same time. But one thing that I do want to know is, did you ever get used to countering the Emmys? Because I tried about 15 times. This isn't a spoiler or anything, because it happens within a pretty short period of time of playing the game. But you can counter them, but you have a really, really small window to do it. And I couldn't figure out exactly when that was. Did you figure that one out after all those hours?
They randomize it.
Oh, that's why I couldn't do it. Yeah. I'm like, what? I swear I pressed it at the time that I thought I should press it.
Yeah, I don't want to.
It's clever though. I like that. I think that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
I like that.
Countering is really important in this game. Sounds weird for a Metro game. Countering is really important. They've like I said, everything they did in the first, like in the remake with Samus Returns and MercurySteam, they've amplified it. So the countering is like a massive element of this game. Mm-hmm. And yeah, with the Emmys, they don't want you to be able to get out of that. They want it to be it's a 50-50, or not a 50-50. I'd say it's probably like a 1 in 10 chance that you'll be able to do it. I think I counted it twice in a row one time. So
whoa, okay.
But like it is, I've realized after a while it was random. And it's probably like, honestly, it's probably like 6 frame window or something like
Yeah,
that.
it's some ridiculously small.
Like,
I
sweetie,
did it twice.
it's so tight.
in
It's so tight.
15, 20 goes.
Yeah.
I don't remember. It's super
Yeah.
tight. Yeah.
Yeah.
So obviously, I thought the same thing. I'm like, this isn't designed. It's a last resort, but you can't really use it because it's pointless. And the game actually tells you that. It tells you that it's highly unlikely you succeed.